Here in a rough outline is how Socrates responds to Cebes' objection in Phaedo. I'm going to break down his response into a different number of parts so you can track it through the readings. The first important thing that Socrates points out at 100d and e is that things have their manifest properties because they participate in forms. So for instance, we've already seen lots of examples of this. The two sticks are equal because they participate in the form equal. The second important thing that Socrates points out is that each form has an opposite. So for example, the opposite of the form equal is the form unequal. The opposite of the form hot is the form cold, and so on. And it's very important that we don't confuse this talk about a form and its opposite with our earlier talk in the cyclic argument about opposites in the world of appearance, and Socrates is very careful to point that out at 103b and c. Now the important thing about forms and their opposites is that the forms themselves never become their opposites. So for instance, the form equal never itself becomes the form unequal, or the form hot never itself becomes the form cold, or the form health never itself becomes its opposite. Now, according to Socrates, particular things in the world of appearance, or particular things more generally, participate in forms in one of two ways, either essentially or non-essentially. So let me now try to explain what this means by first focusing on non-essential participation. So for instance, consider Alice. Alice can participate in the form health today, but participate in the opposite form, that I'm just calling non-health, tomorrow. Now of course, Alice can't participate in both forms at the same time, but she can participate in one form at one time and in another form at another time. Likewise, say a cup of tea can participate in the form hot now, and later participate in the form cold. Now again, it's not the form itself that changes from hot to cold. What happens when the tea gets cold is that the form hot, as Socrates says metaphorically, recedes and the form cold comes to take its place. So it's through this changing participation in the different forms that we can explain the changing temperature of the tea. Now the thing is that not all participation in forms is like that, where the form can participate, where the individual can participate in one form at one time and then a different form in another. So for example, if you think of snow, snow can only ever participate in the form cold, and it can never participate in the form hot. This is an example of what we might call essential participation, because it's part of the very essence of snow to be a cold thing. It cannot be snow if it isn't cold. So snow can never participate in the form hot and still be snow. Likewise, for instance, the number 3 has to always participate in the form odd. It can never participate in the form even and still be the number 3. Now, Socrates makes an analogy. The way the soul participates in the form life is just like the way the number 3 participates in the form odd. The soul participates in the form life in an essential way. It can never participate in death. Now, you might wonder, why does Socrates believe that he has evidence for this claim? And if you look at the text, Plato doesn't give us a lot of evidence for this claim. The closest he comes to giving us any evidence as to why the soul participates in life in this way is on page 143 at 105d, just above the letter D, where Socrates says to Cebes, "Answer me then, what is it that, present in a body, makes it living?" And Cebes says, "A soul." "And is that always so?" "Of course." And then Socrates asks, "Whatever the soul occupies, it always brings life to it?" And Cebes says, "It does." So in other words, the soul is essentially a bringer of life. It's like a life force. It is that which makes inanimate matter alive. And it's just part of its very nature to be a living thing, just like it's part of the very nature of the number 3 to be an odd thing. We don't stop to ask, well, why does it have to be that 3 participates in the form odd in that way? Why can't the number 3 participate in the form even? Because we recognize immediately that it's part of the very essence of the number 3 to be an odd number. Likewise, says Plato, it's part of the very essence of the soul to be the bringer of life, to be a living thing. Now, if that's all true, then the soul is deathless. It cannot die because it never participates in death. And if the soul is deathless, then it cannot be destroyed. And if it cannot be destroyed, then the soul is immortal. So this addresses Cebes' objection, because since the soul is deathless and never participates in the form death, it never wears out. It never degenerates or loses its capacity to bring life, because it always has the capacity to bring life. And that's why the soul is always a living thing that brings life and never ceases to exist.